I'd like to welcome everyone this morning to a very special event that we've been looking forward, at least a lot of us, for a long time. The man that's going to speak today is someone that most of us know here, but just to fill you in on some of the things that some of you may not know, is that Kriyananda is one of the direct disciples of the great master Paramahansa Yogananda, and had the opportunity and blessing to live with the great master for 3.5 years. And then since that time, he's dedicated his life and done a lot to really offer the teachings of the great master and of yoga in all the ways that we can be touched by him, through over 60 books, including books both under the name of Kriyananda as well as under J. Donald Walters. His latest books have been the Secrets books that have touched many, many people in many walks of life. He's also been the composer of over 300 pieces of music that again have brought the spiritual teachings not only to the mind, but to touch people's hearts and their lives in a very direct way. So we're very fortunate to have Kriyananda with us today. So please join me in a warm, welcoming applause for Kriyananda.
Good morning. We're going to begin with a couple of songs, so I'd like to ask the people who will warble with me to come up and let's see, where shall we stand? Okay. This first song is called Nightingale. Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach my heart to impart everywhere your delight. Sing of moon rays on the rain, sing that love's not in vain. Every grief, every wrong has its ending in song.
Nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach the man how to speak love's a gloom into night. Without silence,
What is song? Without night, where is dawn? Were it not torment's woes, who would smile at our rose? Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Let each tone, silent strong, earth and heaven unite. Morning laughter, evening tears, snow and blossom, all fade. Joy must sing the night, to face change unafraid. Nightingale, nightingale, nightingale. I wrote this next piece. It's an interesting, has sort of an interesting genesis, you might say. It was part of a slideshow that I put together of the Amalfi Coast area of Italy. And this was to accompany some slides of a monastery. But the monastery was no longer a monastery, it was a place that tourists come to. So I wanted to capture a little bit of the monastic feeling, but not too much. I wanted to bring it sort of into the modern times. But Well, I'll explain it with the melody, and then you'll hear it, because it's an interesting thing, the way when we allow things to happen through us, but we have to learn to cooperate with them, and that's what I'm going to be talking about partly today. How to draw on intuition, and yet the intuition can't be so much of this New Age music that we hear doesn't go anywhere. It sort of wanders in the name of being intuitive, whereas in fact intuition is a very clear, concise, but not necessarily logical function of the human mind. And so the first part was cloisters. Long I've called you, my Lord, long I've called you. That's very Gregorian in feeling. Many years I have longed for your sight. Then I came out of that mold, because after all it's not a monastery, so I said, bathe the darkness with tears. Gregorian music would never go up to that note. It would still be held within that tight bound. But I wanted to have the more freedom of these times. Bathe the darkness with tears of devotion, offered candles in prayer to your light. Now, what does modern music want to do after that? How much longer, friend? Get very emotional. Well, you can't do that if you want to have deep feeling. Emotional is scattered feeling. And so I had to rein it in and come up a little later than you'd expect it to, but not as high as you would want it to if it were to become emotional. And so, how much longer, friend? Didn't go up to la. How much, see, music is a language. How much longer, friend, must I cry your name? Then I didn't want it to end. I wanted to feel eternal. So I didn't end it on the tonic as normally music would end, the first note of the scale. I am yours, ever yours, will you? Now, music law, the rules of music would demand that you say, will you come, right? But that would have killed the song. I'm yours, ever yours, will you come? You see, it goes off into the distance. Now, the interesting thing was, I didn't think any of this. I analyzed it later. This kind of, when you try to get into an intuitive flow, you don't analyze, but you have to control in some way. So, what I did was say to my superconscious in meditation, I want a song that says this. I want it to be monastic, but I don't want it to be too monastic. I want it to be somewhat modern, but not too modern. I want it to take me into eternity and not just sort of finish me at the gate where I came in. And so I said, okay, give me that melody. There it was. I didn't have to work for it. There was a moment when it wanted to go up, la, and I knew, oh, that's not right at all, so I said, come back. But you'll see that intuition is a cooperation between a higher feeling and your own nature. You have to be the one to sort of control it, direct it, but you can't do it if you just try to think it mentally. Thought-born inspiration is not really inspiration. And many composers have mentioned this, that they say that the real music that they've written has been given to them. But they had to make it happen. They couldn't just wait for it passively. They had to demand that it come. They had to ask in such a way that they knew it would come. It can't be this sort of thing, well, why don't you come? Which is almost a way of saying, well, I don't expect you to, I know you won't, and I'll be horrified if you do. You have to have, when you want to use your intuitive powers, which we're going to talk about today, you have to use your willpower. You have to demand, it's your right. You have a right to have inspiration. You have a right to have this guidance. It's not as if God saw you and said, oh, I like your baby blue eyes, I guess I'll give you my grace. You're the one who draws it to you by your willpower, by your upliftedness, by your clarity. What this often does is just give you that clarity, but it doesn't come from the thinking mind, because the thinking mind doesn't give real solutions. It goes in circles. It's when you can come out of that to a higher level that the real inspiration comes. So these composers, quite a few of them have said, I'm talking of a book that I've read called Talks with Great Composers by a man called Abel, a fascinating book. And he wrote about meetings that he had with Brahms and different other great writers, poets and composers. And he said that they said that those composers who write with their brains will never be great composers. Those who think they can figure it out, that they can make it all happen, they're working on a lower level of the mind. And what we want to get into, and what I want to talk about in our talk of attuning ourselves with the inspiration of this higher age, is we want to attune ourselves to something that we can receive, but that is ours. We're not passive recipients. We're the ones who have to make it happen. My own but God-given power, you might put it that way, as Yogananda did. So anyway, we'll sing the song.
We'll sing it through twice. Please join us the second time if you know it.
Who sings first, the men or the women?
Yes, together.
You do? All together? I'm sorry, I haven't practiced it with them.
You sing the melody.
We do it differently. Okay. Long I've called you, my Lord. Long I've called you. Many years I have longed for your sight. With the darkness, with tears of devotion, offered candles in prayer to your light. How much longer, friend, must I cry your name? I am yours, ever yours. Will you come? Long I've called you, my Lord. Long I've called you. Many years I have longed for your sight. With the darkness, with tears of devotion, offered candles in prayer to your light. How much longer, friend, must I cry your name? I am yours, ever yours. Will you come? Thank you. It was a curious thing about that slideshow, since I'm thinking about it, it's an example only. But you can't, if you're going to really try to be creative, you can't let your moods get into it. It can't come from a mood level. It's got to come from a higher level. And an interesting thing about that one is I did all of these. There were 9 different pieces, and they all came in an hour. And one before this was about Pompeii. And again, I had this thought that Pompeii was, after all, a great tragedy. Yet it wasn't, it can't be that tragic after 2,000 years. It's more an interesting tragedy than an intense, immediate tragedy. And it was a devastation that we can assume was born of the sins of the town and so on. At least the philosophical part of our minds prefers to think that these things are visited upon us not just by accident, but for some sort of lesson we have to learn, something that we have to get out of it. And yet the sins of that town, which are notorious, are sort of a downer. We don't want that. We want something that in retrospect we can learn from it, so it has to be uplifting too. So again, I held all those 4 thoughts up and I said, I want that kind of melody. And the melody that came was just exactly what I wanted it to be. Then I had another one which I wanted to be happy, and I wanted it to be a tarantella. And so suddenly that melody came to me. When you come from Napoli, la 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 la, life is long and joy is free, la 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Right after that came Cloisters. Completely different shift. But because I wasn't in any of those moods, I was just sort of drawing them down, like pulling a screen down, you know. It worked. But I want to talk today about the fact that we are in a new age and what it means to be in a new age. I know here in Dallas, probably more than in many parts of the country, you hear the great controversy between the fundamentalists, Baptists, and so on, and the New Agers. And the New Agers say that we are New Agers, and the Baptists say, well, we ain't, and we're again it. And what I'd like to point out is that we all are and can't help it. There's just nothing we can do about it, and there's no point in being a New Ager. You're just living in a new age. And I would like to talk about the nature of this new age. What does it mean? In what way can I dare to say that it's a new age? One way, it's quite obvious. You look around you, you see things that haven't been there ever before. Back at, I think it was in 1895, 98 maybe, the director of the Patent Office, U.S. Patent Office, suggested to, I think it was President McKinley at that time, that they close the Patent Office. He said everything that could possibly be invented has already been invented. Well, that was at a time when we didn't have virtually anything of what we have today, that we take so much for granted. Cars, freeways, television, radio, people flying around the world, flying off to the moon. I recently saw a fantastic video of the Voyager 2 visits to Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. It was most inspiring to look at them up close. But none of this could have been dreamed of before. My father, who was a scientist in a way, he was a geologist, was scoffing in 1965, I think it was, that he said that they'd never get anybody on the moon. It was just ridiculous. And within his lifetime, of course, they did, and I never heard him mention the subject again. But the greatest change that has taken place in these 100 years has been not only our awareness of, but our growing reliance on use of energy. My dad, as an oil geologist, went to Romania, and I was born there for that reason. And he said that oil was seeping out of the ground there. Nobody knew what to do with it. It was just a big smell. And then they discovered what it meant. I've always wondered, did people develop energy consciousness because they found energy? Or did they have energy consciousness and that was why they found uses for the things they saw? I say it's the latter. That stuff was oozing out of the ground for centuries. Nobody thought anything about it. Then they began to develop the consciousness of the need for energy, and then they discovered energy. And it wasn't very long, I think it was just 7 years after the president of the Patent Office made that remark, that they discovered that matter is energy. That matter is only an electromagnetic wave. It has no actual substance at all. But if you talk of it as substance, it still isn't at all the way it looks. Your body, you may be a big 220-pound football player. If you were to take out all the space from between your atomic particles, you would be reduced to the size of a speck of dust. That's how much matter we have in our body, which isn't matter anyway. It would still weigh 220 pounds, because the space doesn't weigh anything. But it would be that small. We're mostly space. Why don't we, when we put one hand against another, or when we sit on a chair, Why does the chair feel hard after a couple of hours or so? And I'll do my best not to. Why? Because there are different vibrations. And those vibrations won't allow you to penetrate. Otherwise, you should be able to quite easily move your hand right through the other hand, because that's all they are anyway. One or two atoms out of the whole thing might collide and it wouldn't make any difference anyway. But you see, the world isn't at all the way it looks. We have moved into a new age, an age of energy. This is something people didn't have in recorded history. But in 1894, a book came out by Sri Yukteswar in India, who was the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, who was my guru. He was not only a great spiritual master, but he was also a great scientist and astronomer. And he, going through the ancient texts of India is the only country in the world that has preserved its ancient civilization intact through the disintegrating forces of time. And so if you look to India, you can discover in many ways things people knew before that they lost contact with and are now beginning to rediscover. For example, I've read several books mentioning the Mahabharata, the two great epics in India. And in the Mahabharata, it describes a war, in the war of Kurukshetra. It describes a weapon that just seemed fantastic until they exploded the first atom bomb. And then they were amazed to see that it was just an exact description of the atomic bomb. They knew things in those ages, those ancient times, that we don't know. They have descriptions in some of those ancient treatises of flying machines. They even tell you how to make them. And people, when they didn't have any flying machines, just dismissed it as a myth. When they had the arrogance to think that nobody could possibly know in those days, therefore it must mean something else, or it must be a magical weapon that somebody imagined, they just sort of dismissed it. But now more and more voices are beginning to think that it looks as if they did know what they were talking about. Well, among these ancient texts, Sri Yukteswar discovered one which is extremely apposite, extremely pertinent to this age of energy. He said that the sun rotates around its dual, and that there is an outpouring, a vast outpouring of energy from the center of this galaxy, and that in our rotation, as we approach that center, there's more energy coming to the earth, and mankind becomes more aware of the subtle forces behind matter, the subtle forces behind this material universe, and other things that I'll go into in a little bit. The interesting thing here is that when he wrote that book, nobody knew that the sun was even rotating. They considered the sun to be the center of the universe. It wasn't until 1918 that the American astronomer Shapley demonstrated that the sun was not the center of the universe. It wasn't until 1923 when the famous astronomer Hubble made his discovery that what had looked like a nebula in the galaxy, in the constellation of Andromeda, was in fact not a nebula but another galaxy. That they began to realize that all the stars that we see around us are not the universe at all. They're just our galaxy, and we're enough on the outskirts of this galaxy for these individual stars to have some sort of, you might say, persona of their own. But when you look, the Milky Way, it was discovered to be just looking edgewise into the galaxy from near the outskirts. And because of there being some 100 billion stars in the galaxy, it looks like a Milky Way. But they didn't know any of that then. They didn't know that the sun moves. They didn't know that this galaxy has a shape, a form. They knew that certain stars move, but they assumed that the movement of those stars was around the sun in just great sweeping arcs of time. And I remember when I was a schoolboy back in the 1930s, I was instrumental in founding an astronomy club at our school in England. And I think my approach, I should say, my approach to philosophy was through astronomy. I wanted to be an astronomer. And the marvel that we all felt, realizing that there were 2 and possibly 3 other galaxies besides our own. Now they know that there are 100 billion of them, and I suppose they've stopped counting. The vastness of this universe was inconceivable at that time, had not been conceived. Then they didn't know if the sun moves, in which direction it moved. They didn't know where the center of the galaxy was because they didn't know we had a galaxy. And Sri Yukteswar said that the sun is gradually moving in a direction toward the center of our galaxy. Well, it's actually moving toward the constellation Hercules, but Hercules can easily be en route to the center, because we wouldn't be making a beeline, we'd be going in an ellipse toward it, so we'd be going a little off center to reach that center. So that worked perfectly well. Another thing was his statement, there's a vast outpouring of energy from the center of our galaxy. I think it was only in the 70s, I could be mistaken, that they found out that there is a vast outpouring of energy from our galaxy, from the center of it. They didn't know that at that time. They didn't know it until quite recently. In fact, so recently that astronomers are still engaged in a great debate as to what it might mean. Now, instruments would only be able to measure physical kinds of energy. And that's all that physics can even talk about, is physical kinds of energy. But there are many, many subtler levels of energy, of which this is just the grossest manifestation, that which will sort of leak into our physical instruments. And that vast outpouring of physical energy is only a lower manifestation of the fact that it's energy on all levels, ultimately a spiritual energy. And as we come closer to that, we begin to wake up. People are much more aware today than they were 2,000 years ago. He said that we are going in a circle around this dual. And astronomers, if there's one thing they didn't know anything about, it was a dual. But it was just a few years ago that the newspapers came out with different hypotheses of scientists that there must be a dual to account for certain eccentricities that they observed in the orbits of the outer planets. And so astronomers are now beginning to take seriously the possibility, at least, of there being a dual. Well, Sri Yukteswar, having been right on everything that's been checked so far, we can assume that he was right on this one too. But the essence of it is also something that we can observe on Earth, around us. And it's very meaningful to where we are right now. That he said that this great cycle takes 24,000 years, and that it corresponds with the precession of the equinox. That's the second thing of that the scientists are not in tune with. They think of the precession of the equinoxes as being a wobble. Sri Yukteswar explained it another way. There's no way of pairing those two. I don't know how to answer that one, except to say they were maybe separate systems that work together. I don't know. But 24,000 years is awfully close, which is the ancient treatises, is awfully close to our present figure of 25,000, some 600 or so. And it could easily be, too, that there isn't the same speed of movement all the time during this, which would mean that it could be, for instance, when you're farther away, you might be moving faster as you come toward it, and then slowing as you come back. And we can only judge by the present rate of movement of the precession of the equinoxes. So this all comes down to the fact that in those 24,000 years, you've got 12,000 ascending, coming towards, and 12,000 descending, going away from. And these 12,000 years are divided into 4 basic ages of man. Fortunately for us, the lower ages are the shortest, and the highest ages are the longest. So the descending age, which is called Kali Yuga, or Dark Age, is 1,200 years, and then coming back in the direction toward that central part of the galaxy again, we see another 1,200 years. He figured the nadir of this as being 500 AD, and the end of that dark period as being 1700 AD. So, in fact, we entered the New Age, what they called in the ancient teachings Dwapara, which has no deeper meaning than just second age. Dwa means two. In the second age of these four, we entered that in 1700 AD. There are 200 years of Shandhya, or passageway, before you come to the actual beginning of Dwapara proper. And that puts it at 1900. Just this time when this whole new way of looking at things, new way of thinking of things came into being. And in fact, it's not a fad. It's not as if once the oil fields run dry, we'll go back to the medieval ages. Some people have postulated that. It's not so. We were energy conscious, growingly energy conscious, and that's why we found oil. And after oil, we'll probably find wind, tides, sun, all kinds of other. There's a new one where they talk about the generating energy by the difference between the cold water deep in the ocean and the warm water at the top. And that difference they can bring into creating a vast amount of perfectly free energy. We are, at the same time, in our own consciousness, we see things differently. We see things not so much in fixed terms. And you have to understand that when... Need a little swig of tea here. When the consciousness of man changes toward energy, it affects not only his knowledge of physics, it affects the way he dresses, it affects the way he sings, the way he works. When we think of matter as the final and ultimate and absolute reality, then our minds automatically go in that direction too. We think that truth has to be put in a formula. We have to make a dogma out of it. We think that music and art and poetry have to be exactly formalized and formulized. We think that our institutions have to be exact. We think that science has to be following Aristotelian logic. Aristotle lived in the descending dark age. And in that dark age, people were thinking more and more in a sort of frozen, limited form. Aristotle, his way of thinking was either this or that. It was black and white. Worked perfectly for science. But it doesn't work so well for people. People are not, the reality of things is not fixed, one or the other. It's a growing thing. Science in the future is also going to be thinking directionally. They had a test recently of chemotherapy. It was a control test. So the control people were persuaded that they were getting chemotherapy, but in fact they weren't. Some 20 or more % of the people who were in that control group lost all their hair. Our mind has such an incredible amount to do with how well we are and how well we do and whether we succeed. And when things go well, there's another aspect to it too. When your attitude is right, somehow you seem to attract things. I knew a family in Mexico City back in '45. And the father always liked to go to the horse races, and the mother and daughter didn't care. But one day they decided they'd go with him. And so they betted on the horses. And he just couldn't believe it. They won every bet. And he knew what he was doing, and they didn't know anything. They bet on a horse because they liked that funny little spot on his nose. For other equally superficial and nonsensical reasons. Why does beginner's luck, why is it a phrase that people use? It's somehow that when you have only positive expectations and no negative expectations, all your energy is going in one direction. It's a lot stronger. And that energy will affect even your luck. It's like an electric wire that you put an electric current in it, and it generates a magnetic field. Well, we're talking of subtle realities from which these lower realities, of which they are manifestations. In a higher age, they'll discover that energy is only a manifestation of thoughts. In the highest age, they discover that everything is really a manifestation of God's consciousness. And then we gradually fall down from that into the lowest consciousness again of thinking that matter is the ultimate and final reality, and heaven is a place that's fixed somewhere in space, and so on. But they didn't have anything to make them think they couldn't succeed. It looked like a perfectly simple thing. And they had only buoyant expectations, as a result of which they were drawn to the right bet, the right horse, and everything worked perfectly. I know my brother and his wife took their children to Reno one time, and they thought, well, they would like to teach them to really get it into their minds, the evils of gambling. So they gave them a couple of dollars and told them to go ahead and bet. Well, every quarter they put in, it just came gushing out. Those kids came away thinking it was the best way to make a living. But you know, it does work to an astonishing degree that when you don't know the odds against you, you're much more likely to succeed than when you know them and weigh all the things, and they're so reasonable that you don't put any energy out one way or another. Because it's energy that generates success. It's energy that generates anything that you want to do. And it's energy, in fact, that makes the difference between genius and stupidity. If you look at people who are intelligent, you'll see that every one of them has a lot of energy, at least mental energy. He may not be very much on physical exercise, he may be unbalanced, but at least he'll have a lot of mental energy. Whereas a stupid person is invariably somebody with very little mental energy. I mean, how do we depict a stupid person? Oh, I don't know, yeah? Isn't that right? We don't say, I don't know, I'm just stupid. Genius, awareness, all of these go with energy. So it makes sense that as we get into a place where there's more energy coming to us, those who have a better receptivity in their own system will receive more and understand it on deeper and subtler levels. So that we are coming to the point more and more where what will rule our lives is energy. I find writing with a computer. I used to write by hand. Then I went to the typewriter. And it was such a drag. Writing by hand, you can see why those people back in the earlier centuries wrote such long sentences. It's beautiful writing, but the writing of somebody who can only go in very long rhythms, slow rhythms. And the worst of it is you're writing about all these ideas that keep coming into your mind. You have to push them aside, so you can only, when you write that way, follow a rather lumbering argument. And you read writings, even well-written writings of, say, the last century. I love, for example, Thoreau. But he does take a long time getting to the point. One of the books I loved most was Walden, but it was the same thing. And now I find with the computer it's fantastic. Because with the typewriter even, you reach a point where you think, my God, to change that one word, I've got to retype a whole manuscript, because that word takes me on to the next page. And then the pages get longer. It's just not worth it. So you compromise. When I wrote The Path, I think Asha, I let her do it, must have written that thing all the way through 10 times. Because I would scribble and scribble between the scribbling and then scribble between that and then bring things up to the top and write it. Somehow she figured it all out and typed it. But now, if I want to change one little word that'll make the paging different for the rest of the manuscript, just put it in. The whole thing's automatic. I find I can write 10 times better in a tenth of the time. Energy. I'm not all that much in favor of computers really in some ways, because they have very harmful vibrations that come from them. And it's a very interesting thing. When I worked with computers years ago, I would feel sort of a little bit, you know that feeling if you've ever worked with computers? You don't feel quite right. Then I discovered this scientist in Italy who makes cylinders that neutralize those harmful rays. those waves. I put that in front of my computer, now I can go all day and that just doesn't bother me at all. A friend of mine is a scientist in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley, and he has two computers exactly the same. He has one of these cylinders on the computer at home, but doesn't have one at the office. And at the one at home, he can just keep going all day and it doesn't bother him. At the one at the office, he really feels tired at the end of the day. So there are things that we're developing now, which is on the cutting edge, you might say, of new discoveries, but all of them leading in the direction of energy, electromagnetism, new uses of energy that are not just electrical, but much more subtle, because you understand that your own body is a body of energy. The matter it's composed of is itself a wave of electromagnetic energy. But also, every time you send a thought to the muscles, they say, well, blood fills the muscles and so they become hard. What sends the blood there? Well, thought. Thought won't do it. I can send my thought to your arm and will that it swell up with blood so that it become tense. It won't happen unless I develop some extraordinary power or something. But it would still have to go through your mind to your arm by the medium of energy. I send energy to the arm, nothing happens. I will the arm to move, nothing happens. I will the energy to move the arm, instantly I can move it. Energy is the link between thought and matter. And when we can control the energy, we can control our health, we can control our lives, we can control our destiny. It all comes down to energy, finally. Many, many subtler levels of energy. Because love itself is a kind of energy. I'll never forget standing, I was with Yogananda and I was just about to leave the room. And I didn't have my glasses on. Without my glasses, I'm pretty blind. I know there are people out there somewhere, but I couldn't clearly see the expression in his face, but I suddenly felt such a wave of love coming over me that it brought tears to my eyes. I could hardly pull myself away. That kind of power. There's a beautiful story about Yogananda that one of his disciples, a sister disciple of mine, told me, that she was taking dictation in Encinitas, and there was a rose vase on the table next to him, and it was pointing toward him. And somebody knocked on the door, and he went to see who it was and talked for a moment, and she happened to glance at the rose, and she said, well, wait a minute. It was pointing toward him, but now it's pointing toward him and he's at the door. And she thought, well, that's odd. I must not have seen it right. So she didn't think about it further. And he came back and sat down and was dictating again. And she just happened to look over at the rose and it was pointing toward him. He said, no, wait a minute. No, it was pointing toward the door. No, it was oh, that can't be so. Something's wrong with my brain. A little bit later, he was called to the door again. And the rose, she looked at the rose a little bit more carefully this time, and suddenly she realized it was pointed toward the door. Then he came back, and he sat down, and this time she looked at the rose quickly to see what was happening. It was pointing toward the chair where he was sitting. And she finally said, Master, you have a new devotee. But the thing is, he had that kind of energy of love that made the rose turn toward him as a sunflower turns toward the sun. The power of our minds and the energy that we emit is of many, many different types. And the interesting thing is that our magnetism depends on the intensity, the strength of that flow, and the quality of that flow. In other words, there is a negative kind of energy as well as a positive kind. There was one student of Yogananda's, not a disciple, but he was very good at hypnosis. And Yogananda used to say hypnosis is not good because it imposes on another person's will. A person should be magnetized, which is inspired to use his own will to change, whereas hypnosis bypasses the will and weakens the will as a result. And so he told this man not to use that power. And he noticed him at a party one time. The man was talking to a group of people, surrounded by a group of people, and there was one young woman there who was heckling him. And Yogananda noticed this and didn't think anything more about it, but about 10 minutes later he saw this man, and the woman was following around like a puppy. And Yogananda called him aside. He said, "I told you not to do that." He said, "I know, sir, but she was getting on my nerves." Well, as a result. And so he told this man not to use that power. And he noticed him at a party one time. The man was talking to a group of people, surrounded by a group of people, and there was one young woman there who was heckling him. And Yogananda noticed this and didn't think anything more about it, but about 10 minutes later he saw this man, and the woman was following around like a puppy. And Yogananda called him aside. He said, "I told you not to do that." He said, "I know, sir, but she was getting on my nerves." But the thing is, you find that people do have magnetic power, some of it for evil. Hitler had only to walk into a room and it would suddenly become silent. They wouldn't even know he'd come. He had tremendous magnetism. You look at that funny little face with that funny little mustache and you think that he's a comedy figure. But he had great magnetism. He wouldn't have been able to do what he did had he not had that magnetism. The only thing about it was a negative kind of magnetism, but the principles apply. You develop that magnetism by energy. When you have a lot of energy, you will be able to accomplish things that you wouldn't dream of otherwise. But that energy comes partly in one way. I talked about this last night, how if you push on two sides of a door, you may wear yourself to exhaustion, and yet the door won't even move. So much of what we try to do, we also try to undo. We try to feel it on a spiritual level. We try to rise toward God, toward truth, toward divine things. And then we negate it by saying, "I'm a sinner, I'm not worthy. Who am I to think that I have any right to enter the kingdom of heaven," and all these thoughts. So we're pushing on opposite sides of a door. That's why Yogananda used to say that the greatest sin is to call yourself a sinner. Tell yourself you're a child of God, that you have a right to anything that God has because you're His child. And you will find that if you have a completely positive view, you can grow toward that easily. And anything that you want to become good at, convince yourself that that's you. Not that it's something you can't do, that it's foreign to you, it's difficult, and so on. No. You can do it because that is what you are. If you want to be an artist, then think of yourself as an artist. Convince yourself that you're an artist. Mix with people who have that kind of magnetism already, who are successful artists. Don't mix with losers. You'll find that they drag you down just by their negative thoughts. There was one person that another disciple, Dr. Lewis, talked about, who was always negative. He always found something wrong to say about everything. And one time Dr. Lewis came and played the piano, and he played very nicely, and everybody enjoyed it. And the man said, "Oh, I wish I could play like that." Negative. He always turned it back to himself and always put himself down or put other things down and so on. Well, these things, mind you, have their own magnetism. Why do people lose in life? Basically because they are losers. If you have a right and positive attitude, you can win. You can win in extraordinary ways. Things will be attracted to you. You see, the energy, this is a very interesting point to consider. Energy has its own intelligence. You don't have to see how it's going to happen. You don't have to follow it around every corner. You put out the right energy, it will generate the magnetism. It will have its own power to come back. I had a very interesting experience that way years ago. After 10 years, I felt the inner guidance to go to India again. And I didn't have much income at the time. Some people helped me with a little bit of gifts for the trip. I had some money from classes. I had about $2,000, which at that time, 1972, was enough to get me to India and help me to enjoy it and get back again after a couple of months or 3. Well, 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, my car developed some sort of trouble. I think it threw a rod. And I'm not sure of this terminology, but I seem to remember the word rod in there somewhere. To me, a car is a magical instrument. You propitiate it by turning the key, and if the motor is pleased, it'll turn over. And anyway, it was perfectly obvious I had to get rid of this car. And I thought, well, what shall I do? If I live up there in the mountains, I need a car to get around. If I go to India, I won't have any money when I get back. So I tried to think about it for some time. I always think of God as my Divine Mother. I don't think of Heavenly Father. It's just my own particular bias or sentiment or whatever. And so I said, Divine Mother, I don't know what I'm to do, but I feel you want me to go to India, and yet my common sense tells me I'm going to need a car when I come back. So I'm going to get another car, and if you really want me to go to India, you're just going to have to reimburse me. That's the way I did it. But I put a lot of energy into that thought. So I sold the car for $700, and I put $1,100 down. So with $1,900, I was able to get a good used car. At that time, that was good money for a used car. And I needed another $1,100. Well, that was Friday evening. The next Monday morning, I got a letter in the mail from somebody I'd never heard of before, and it enclosed a check to me, not to Ananda, but personally to me. And he said, use this as Divine Mother wants you to. How would he know that I would worship Divine Mother? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I don't know. But what an astounding thing to have happen. I've seen this happen many times. One time I went to Carmel. I always, when I finish a major work, I like to celebrate with God. So I went to Carmel, but the trouble was it was August, and I didn't stop to think that this was the height of the tourist season. All the hotel rooms were taken. And I just finished the 14 steps to higher awareness. That is the course many of you know about. And I just felt so good at having finished this work. I felt really good about the work. And I got to Carmel, and I found there was nothing available. Finally, after a lot of inquiry, I found one room, but it was much more expensive than I could afford to pay. So I wasn't sure what to do. And finally I said, well, there's no point in going to Salinas, which is just sort of cow town. And so I said to Divine Mother, well, okay, I'll take it, but you're going to have to see that I can get home again. So I took out my wallet to pay for the room, and the man said, oh, don't bother to pay me. And I said, well, I'd rather pay you now, meaning I wasn't sure I'd have the money the next day. And he said, no, I don't want you to pay me at all. I said, why not? He said, I don't know, I just like you. Well, you know, I've been in an awful lot of hotels in my life, but that's the only time that has happened. And the next day I went to a restaurant for lunch, and the owner recognized me from a lecture I'd given and came over and sat with me and wouldn't let me pay for my lunch. So I didn't spend any money in Carmel except for gas. But this kind of thing, if it happens once, if it happens twice, oh, beautiful coincidence, beautiful something or other. But I've seen it happen again and again and again. That when you put the energy out, you can call it God's power, you can call it that energy has its own intelligence, and you don't have to say it's either one or the other, because they're both true, they work together. But when you put the thought out, you'll find that things happen for you in your life that can make everything turn out as it should. In this world, we live between boom and bust. We have suddenly all this great prosperity, suddenly everybody's losing jobs, there's no money anywhere, stores are closing, and you think that you're a complete slave to those circumstances, so that you feel buoyed up by things when they go well, and you feel crushed by fate when things go badly. Well, in fact, there's something much subtler ruling your life. And on a conscious level of what you can do about it, it has strictly to do with what your consciousness is. That if you can get rid of the negative thoughts, and I mean negative thoughts of all kinds, it's almost impossible to get rid of them completely. Because the mind sees things in two ways. The world is a mixed bag. We find things to criticize, things not to like, we can't really help that. But there's one thing that I've found that really does work. And that is to see it all as God's play. Then you don't have to carry the burden on your own shoulders. You don't have the responsibility for straightening the world out. You just do your best, but you know He's taking care of it. And suddenly you find that you're in a positive mode, so that even when things go badly, you just think, well, I've got something perhaps to learn from this. Maybe he worked off a little temper. Maybe I'll take up karate and be stronger next time. Whatever it is, but your mind goes in a positive direction. And the more you live in that consciousness, mind you, to live in divine consciousness does not mean to be passive. Many people allow spiritual teachings to make them passive. They think that, well, when God smiles on me, then I'll do it. And so they do all these little antics to try to please God. And I sometimes think of an experiment that they made with pigeons, where they had a little door above the little compartment, little cage of each pigeon that opened once every 5 seconds and dropped one seed. And they came back the next day, and they found these pigeons in an incredible assortment of different poses, each born of the thought that it was that made that seed drop. One would crane its neck like this, thinking that was making it fall. Another one was scratching. Another one was ruffling its feathers. All of them thought with some sort of superstitious awe that this was what was going to make the seed fall. People think of that as an example of superstition among the pigeons, but I see it's also a sign of reason. They were trying to make some connection, they just didn't get the right connection. And a lot of things that we do are only superstitious because we didn't see it through clearly enough. It wasn't an actual connection. That's where science comes in. That's where we need to control and see. But I think we're developing into a time, coming into a time when we're thinking of directional logic, not just A or B, this or that. Anyway, what we find, for example, there was a story in India of a man whose father died, and he did the Shraddha ceremony, as they call it, the ceremony for the dead, that the oldest son is supposed to perform. And he did it according to the ancient Brahminical rituals and so on. Well, many years later, when he died, his son, who had been at that ceremony, wanted to do it exactly the way his father had done it. And he remembered that during the ceremony, a dog had come into the little prayer room, and that was something unclean to have happen. And so the man, his father, had jumped up and taken the dog and tied it to a post outside the prayer room, then come in and finish the ceremony. Well, his son didn't have a dog, and so he had to go to his neighbors to borrow one, because it was obvious that you had to tie a dog to a post. And over the generations of that family, the dog became the most important part of their ceremony, because it was the one thing that was different from all the other Shraddha ceremonies. Well, religion is often like that. That's why one great saint in India said it's a good thing to be born into a religion, but it's a misfortune to die in one. In other words, we should use religion to expand our consciousness, not to narrow it. We should use it to see that the truths that we see exemplified here are truths that belong to life, not to that little post, not to that little particular example. And that life itself is a manifestation of the greatest worship ceremony of all. That every flower, every plant, every brook, everything in its own way is worshiping God, because it's worshiping life. It's worshiping a growth in awareness towards something higher. There's something in religion which, even though you can't say that there is unanimity among religions, except in certain very basic principles, there is this in all of them, even those that are atheistical, like the Shinto religion, which doesn't believe in God, and yet it tries to expand man's consciousness, elevate man's consciousness. We need to bring it back to that, and then to grow above the definitions that elevate it to the point where we see that it's something we can do inside ourselves. We have to grow by our own wisdom. We have to grow by our own intelligence. We need to stop separating our worldly life from our spiritual life. There was one home I stayed in outside Vancouver, Canada. And the man was a wealthy man and was sort of feeling, I think, that therefore he was unspiritual. And yet he followed the spiritual path, and he said, well, my life isn't out there. My life begins when I come home. I close the door of my prayer room, and I sit down before the altar. That's when my life begins. I thought, what a pity. He should bring himself to the point where his whole life is prayer. Why can't he think that he's in prayer when he's serving his customers? Why can't he think that he's expanding his consciousness when he's thinking of new ideas for his work? Why can't he see that it's all one? Religion isn't just something you lock up in a box, something you close the door on. Religion must become a part of our lives, of everything that we do. Now, during Kali Yuga, during the Dark Age, that was more difficult because you thought in terms of form. So the church is here, my shop is here, my home is here. But in an age of energy, we realize that really this is all sort of one and part of the same reality. It's not so much a name you give it. You don't have to make a dogma out of it. Dogma is a good thing to a certain point because it brings you up to a certain level in your thinking. After that, it becomes dogmatism, unless you grow beyond it. It limits your thinking because the whole world is a church. We have this great sacred dome above our heads. Going out into nature is also a church where you see God manifested in so many different ways. Now, some people bring this to the point where they think that, well, I don't want to go to church, I don't want to go to the synagogue, I don't want to go to the temple because God is everywhere. That's not true. It's good to have a focal point. It's good to have certain good teachings. It's good to mix with people who are spiritual because they uplift your consciousness. We, in this world of energy and magnetism, have to also understand that we are bombarded with all kinds of energy in our lives. The kinds of thoughts of people around us, they send energy to us. And if you mix with people who are down kinds of people, there was one boy who used to come into my room when I lived in the monastery at Mount Washington, and as soon as he'd come into my room, it was as if a black cloud had come with him, and he'd sit on the bed in this heavy mood, and by the time he left, I just felt the world wasn't worth living in. People have their own magnetic power, and you must be aware of that, and don't think that, well, I should be able, as a good Christian or a good Jew or whatever, to mix with everybody with charity. Because some people will have a more strong negative magnetism than your powerful good magnetism. You may have a weaker good magnetism is what I meant, not powerful. You exchange magnetism every time you shake a person's hands. There is two magnets formed like this, the top part of the body and the lower part of the body, and the positive pole and the negative pole. They will attract each other. Opposites attract. They will be drawn. You will be taking on, the weaker magnetism will take on the stronger. And if it's a weaker spiritual magnetism, it will take on the stronger material magnetism. If it's a weaker material magnetism, it'll take on the stronger. But inasmuch as we all have our moments of strength and weakness, it's a good thing to mix with good people. It's a good thing to be in the company of people who have positive thoughts. It's a good thing to realize that everything that we do is or should be, and in fact is whether we know it or not, just as you're in a new age, whether you like it or not, so you're living in a spiritual world, whether you like it or not, or know it or not. Everything that you do in one way or another takes you toward the truth or away from the truth. We can put it in a simple formula. Does it expand your consciousness or does it contract it? Your consciousness, many people think to expand themselves by becoming rich, by reading more, by acquiring more knowledge. That's an expansion of the ego. The expansion that we're talking about is of consciousness itself. And that comes when you share with other people. And therefore you learn to feel joy through them as well as in yourself. That you enjoy their joy as a part of your own joy. This is the kind of expansion that is meaningful. When you help other people to grow, when you help other people to understand, when you help other people to succeed in life, I've noticed that many times people who are quite selfish, when they have children, they become much less selfish, much more giving, because they have no choice. These helpless children, they've got to be fed, they've got to be taken care of. And so you learn to be more generous, where many people who are single or don't have children, they may grow in other ways, but often they've missed an opportunity in that way, which is an important one. We need to have children, but they don't have to be physical children. They need to be children of our imagination, children of our creativity, children of our energy. We need to expand our energy to give to the world, and not just live in a cave in the mountains, away from it all, which too often just locks you up in yourself. Spirituality has to be as much expansion as withdrawal inwardly, and then that withdrawal will not be a contraction, but an expansion. Whereas many times monasteries I visited, I've seen that they were contracted in consciousness because they withdrew, but they didn't expand in that withdrawal. If you withdraw from the outer world in order to expand your consciousness in prayer, that's great. But if you withdraw, if your definition of renunciation is just the things you don't do, then where are you? A person can be, as Manfredi was saying, this man from Italy, he's asked people in their 70s, what have you done for your health? And they say, well, I haven't drunk, I haven't smoked. He said, no, I haven't asked you what you didn't do. I've asked you what you did do. Most people don't understand that this is a positive thing. Happiness is something that you have to feel and not just say, well, I must be happy because I'm not in the hospital, I don't have a cold, I've got enough money in the bank to pay the bills, my wife's still here, thank God. Yeah, I'm happy. I've got a lot of blessings to be thankful for, so I'm happy. You have to understand that happiness is a thing completely separate from any reason for being happy. Don't you know that there are times in your life when you've wakened and just felt so wonderful? You didn't know why? Well, you can have that all the time, and you can have it much more than that. Once you understand that everything that you do is a matter of principles that are born from within yourself and expand outward, rather than waiting for life to give you something to make you happy, successful, secure, all the various things people want. But you, in your life outside, your life is a mirror to what you are. There was a time in college when I got this theory: if you want to be lucky, then expect to be lucky, but go out and meet luck halfway. Don't wait for it to come to you. And I had this consciousness, and I was very sort of optimistic by nature anyway, and so it was very easy for me to put it into practice. Well, while I was working that way, I found all sorts of things happening. Among my relatives, I began to develop a reputation for being fantastically lucky. I hitchhiked from Philadelphia to Mexico City and got one ride the whole distance. I'd go to a town and want to look up somebody, and I'd go into a phone booth to see where he lived, and his house was just across the street. This sort of thing just happened all the time. And then I went to Mexico that summer thinking that I would find the answers that I was looking for. Simple, genuine people, people not too complicated by modernity and wealth and so on. I'd grown up in Esso, Exxon today, and seen all that part of the world. I thought, we need something that's different from Scarsdale, New York. We need to go back to the soil. So going to Mexico, I went with this buoyant expectation. And sure, I got there well, and everything went perfectly because I was certain I could learn the language. I learned it quickly and was able to talk with people wherever I went and so on. But gradually, I looked around and I found that people were no different. Whether they had money or didn't have money, they were the same human being, the same old proneness to moods and anger and fleeting flashes of happiness followed by flashes of despair and so on. The worst of it for me was that I found I could have the same headaches and moods in Mexico City as I could have in Scarsdale, New York. And I realized that I was the one who had to change, not my environment. So I developed a period where I became pessimistic, thinking that, well, I haven't found it, I don't know what the answer is. And I found all of a sudden that my life didn't go right for me. All sorts of things started to go wrong. And only when I'd gotten back my energy and my optimism and so on, suddenly they started to go right again. To a much greater extent than you think, your life is simply a mirror of you, of what your thoughts are, of who you are, of what kind of energy you put out, the expectations you form of others. I have seen people who, let's say in a work where they have to deal with the public, and to one person they become very aggressive, and to the next person they're smiling and wanting to help them, just because of the energy those people are putting out. So we have to change ourselves, and we have to change ourselves in particular ways, and the most natural way for us to change in this day and age is in the direction of energy, is in the direction of thinking of ourselves as bodies of energy and learning how to direct that energy. Now, Paramahansa Yogananda gave us a very good formula for how to direct energy. He said energy, I'm not talking of physical energy, the kind of energy you find in engineering and stuff like that. Electricity, electromagnetism, not that. That is a lower manifestation of a higher spiritual principle. He said that the whole thing is guided by willpower. And he gave us a formula: the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. Will doesn't only mean I'm going to do it if it kills me. Will means also willingness. Because in the first there's friction, there's tension. There's the thought that it's like pushing a piano without rollers over sandpaper. A strong man might not be able to do it, except one man I know who can lift the whole piano. But as a rule, I think even strong men would find it very hard to push a piano over sandpaper if it didn't have rollers. But if you had it on an oiled, slick floor with rollers that were oiled, even a child could push it. What's the difference? Friction, resistance. If we can get rid of the resistance in our minds, if we can get rid of that potentiality for negativity that we all have, if we can get rid of that thought that I can't do it when I'm wanting to do it, or that it's foreign to me, or it's difficult for me, if we can get rid of that and put ourselves completely in the thought that it can be done and I can do it, you'll find that you can do incredible things. There's a very interesting book that many of you have probably read, The Great Imposter. Have you read that book? Well, here was this perfectly ordinary man who somehow had Walter Mitty kind of dreams that he could do these things. And for instance, he was on board ship, and they had no doctor, and somebody needed, I think it was an appendectomy or something. And so he just presented himself as a doctor. He loved the importance of being considered somebody of value. So he hadn't studied medicine, he didn't know anything. But he did this operation, and because he just completely put himself into that role, he did it with such success that he received some sort of award for it. Many things that he did, he carried off with complete success because he was able to act the part so well from within rather than just from without. A good actor does that. He convinces himself that's what he is. He lives that part so fully that he gets in tune with the way those things are done, and he acts that way automatically without even thinking. Because the actions, the specifics, the details, the techniques even, are things that are evolved from that state of consciousness. And if you can change your mind to the point of, we're all actors anyway. Let's act the part we most believe in. We believe in what more than anything else? We believe we're good. Even the worst human being thinks he's good. He somehow finds excuses for the things he's done that aren't good, but he believes in his own basic goodness, and it's not surprising because we're all children of the same one good power. We're all made in that image. We can, if we can believe in our goodness, if we can believe that, yes, I can do this, I'm worthy of doing it, I can be competent in doing it, we can think of it another way. If any human being has done anything well, he has done it in a sense as a representative of the human race. We were all busy specializing in other things. He specialized in that, and so he became Leonardo. Well, there's no reason why, if you really want to, you can't become a Leonardo. He did it. There was a story of a Jew and a Christian. And the Jew was asking the Christian, the Catholic, well, how far can you go in your faith? And he said, well, if you're really serious, you can become a priest. And he said, yeah, and then so, what else? Well, you can if you're a good priest, you can become a Monsignor or even a Cardinal. And he said, so, is that all? And he said, well, if you are really tops in your field, you can become the Pope. And the Jew said, well, so, is that everything? And the Christian said, what do you expect, Jesus Christ? So why not? One of our boys made it. But in fact, I'll never forget. Well, there's another story on that subject. I might as well tell. It's such a good one. It's off the subject, but it's about Jews and Christians. There was this Jew who was, somehow he was walking down the street, somehow found himself caught by a whole lot of Baptists going in to get baptized. And he couldn't resist the flood, and before you know it, he was being dumped in water. And he came home, and he saw his wife, and he said, "Listen, dear, come, I've got something terrible to tell you." And his wife said, "Well, tell me later, dear. I need $100. The stores are about to close, and I'll have to get a new dress." So he gave her $100. And his daughter came in, and he said, "Dear, I've just got something terrible to share with you." And she said, "Well, tell me later, Daddy. The stores are closing, and I need a new hat. Could you give me $100? So he gave her $100. Then his son came in. He said, "Sit down, son. I've got something really heavy to talk about." And the son said, "Well, Dad, tell me later. I've got a part for the car I've got to get. I need a couple of $100 for it." So he gave him a couple of $100, and he sat down on the sofa, and he said, "How do you like that? A Christian only 1 hour already. The Jews have taken me for $400. Anyway, the thing is that we should believe that we can become whatever we want to. Back in the days when nobody had beards, I had a beard. Master told me to grow it. And I would receive sort of catcalls in the streets, "Fidel Castro," and things like this. And however, somebody had a more positive view of the thing, decided I must look like Jesus Christ because I had a beard. So they wanted me to be in a pageant for a Masonic ritual of some kind. And all I had to do was sit up there in Gethsemane and look unhappy, so I managed that one. Sort of heave a heavy sigh every now and then and lean on the rock. And anyway, I came home, and Yogananda said to me that people were very pleased with you, and they said you really looked like Jesus. And I said, well, I'd rather be like him than look like him. Well, you know what? It was so interesting to hear his answer. The normal answer would be to get into the fun of it and say, well, yeah, of course. Who wouldn't, or that kind of thing. No, he was perfectly serious. He said, that will come. You see, he saw each one of us in our potential divine perfection. And he wouldn't allow something like that to go across just lightly and laughable. Because that was his mission in this world, was to make us like that. We should become like that. Jesus didn't come here to just show us how great he was. Something flashed in my mind last night, and some of you heard it. It was pretty absurd. I said I could just imagine. I said they didn't come into this world to just get our applause for how great they were. And I said, can you imagine Jesus on the cross at the end of it? They came to show us our potential. And there, at no time would Yogananda ever let us put ourselves down, especially in spiritual ways. He would always say, you can do it. One morning I greeted him. He said, how are you, Walter? He always called me that. And In our way of talking, I sort of gave a very hesitant, perhaps prelude to a long list of things I might have said, I don't know. But I said, well, that's good. He just wouldn't let us get away with moods or feeling of weakness or anything like that. He was always, I never saw him with a bent spine. He was always seated straight. He was just a dynamo of energy. When you read stories about him now, you begin to think of him as sweet and gentle. And I'll never forget I wrote in The Path, my autobiography, about how he was telling people to start communities like Ananda. He said, go north. This person was reading it at the Sunday service. Go north, south, east, west, everywhere. I said, give me that book. I said, here's the way he said it. He said, you must go north, south, east, west, everywhere. The power of that speech. He obviously didn't talk like that all the time, but you felt that power inside him. Don't be a weakling. When you have the power of the universe at your fingertips, all you have to do is persuade yourself you can be that. Don't constantly make affirmations of, even in the name of humility. This is not humility. Humility is not putting yourself down. It's forgetting yourself in the contemplation of a broader, greater, awe-inspiring reality. We're just a small part of that. We have to accept that. But the more we do, the more we tune into that greater reality, the more we find that we can draw on it and bring into manifestation everything we want. Now here are the principles involved. I said the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. He taught us a series of energization exercises. I can teach you a few of those later if you're interested. The energization exercises are good as movements. In fact, a medical doctor was watching me do them one day, and he started joining me, and he finally said, that's the best system I've ever seen, just for physical well-being, because it's so complete. It brings into movement every part of the body. But they have a much greater purpose than that. You see, what they do is they're for energizing the body. He said the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. You will the energy to flow into the body, and you begin gradually to become aware, first of the muscle tension from within rather than just from without. Then you become aware of the energy flowing into it. You couldn't energize yourself like that playing tennis or football. It's getting to the source of the energy, not working with the effect of it, throwing a ball or whatever. Getting into the source of it. It's not just exercise, it's not just movement and tension and relaxation. It's getting conscious of that which causes your body to tense, which causes it to relax, becoming conscious of the energy flow itself. Then you can send that energy even without tensing and relaxing, but that would be on a higher level of awareness. Just by tensing your body to the point where it vibrates, you can find that you have a great deal of strength. When I was 50, I was in the home of some Indians, and they were Sikhs. They were very strong, powerful people. And his mother, the mother of this Romit is the boy, wanted him to wash the dishes. And he said, oh, don't tell me to do that, Mommy. I'm 25 years old. I'm too young to do things like that. Ask me to do it when I'm 50. Now I'm too strong to do things of that sort. And so I said, okay, I'm 50. I'll challenge you to some arm wrestling. And he was bigger than I and very powerful and very confident. But I beat him. And then we did leg wrestling. And this is something he did all the time. Whenever a friend of his would come over, they would flop down on the floor and do leg wrestling. So I tried leg wrestling with him. Well, he took me by surprise. I thought we'd just put our legs together and then push. But instead, he just went like that before I knew what he was doing. So my leg was at this angle. At that point, I was able to stop him and bring him back, and then finally just pull him over like that. But it's these energization exercises. I'm not an athlete. I just, I had too many late nights drinking coffee and other things during college years, talking philosophy, to be a very good athlete. But I was able to do it through these energization exercises. They give you a lot of control over your body, over your muscles. Yogananda in Boston one time had, I forget the number, it was I think 15 policemen he had pushing on his, in front of an audience, pushing on his abdomen, each one behind the other. And he said, okay, push as hard as you can. He said, are you pushing as hard as you can? Yeah, like this. And he just did blip. They all fell into the orchestra pit. His physical power was extraordinary because he had control of the will, and through the will, control of the energy. But now, here's another thing. Once you become conscious of the energy, then you become conscious of sending that energy out without the wires of your nervous system. Reminds me of a joke. An Indian was saying to a Westerner, you know, in all the archaeological investigation that they have done in this country, they have not found a single wire. This proves that they had the wireless. Well, anyway, by the wireless of just your thought, when the stronger a current in a wire, the stronger the magnetic field. You can notice that when you drive under high tension wires with your radio on. You can hear the static in the radio because the energy flow, the electricity flow is so great. Well, it's just the same principle. There isn't a spiritual and a material world. It's all a spiritual world on different levels of manifestation. So if you really want something in your life, don't worry so much about what to do, but send out a strong thought from this center of will between the eyebrows toward what you want, and just will that it be so. And you'll be surprised. Try it on little things. You'll be surprised how, in many ways, doors open. Not that you've got to go and wonder which door is going to open. You don't have to think that way. That energy, as I said, has its own intelligence. But the more you direct it with willpower, and the more there's absolute faith. Faith is not just belief. Faith is a dynamic knowing, an application of belief. It's an application of will and love and your whole being, you might say. One time, Yogananda was in Los Angeles, and a disciple of his, Dr. Lewis, asked him to pray for somebody who was in a hospital in Chicago. And I think that's the cities involved. And so Yogananda did. Just at the moment that he prayed, in that same time frame, there was an explosion in that room in the hospital. And a very materialistic nurse was there who didn't believe in things like this, but she heard it too, and she was just amazed because a moment later, the patient sat up completely well. And she testified to that. But it was like an explosion there. It doesn't always have to happen that way, but there was actual energy. When you send energy out through the point between the eyebrows is a very important way of doing it. The more you meditate, the more you develop your awareness of this point, because it's the seat of ecstasy in the body as well as of will. The more you'll see that you can make these things happen, and people call these things miracles. They're not miracles at all. If you were able to materialize yourself back in the 16th century or 14th century, complete with a television set and a battery to run it, they would think this is a miracle. Or they'd more likely call it witchcraft and burn you at the stake or something. Better be able to get back to the 20th century fast. But what we consider miracles, when saints levitate or when different people do all sorts of amazing things that normal people can't do, it's only because they can are operating higher levels of law, which every one of us can do if we can just get to that level. It's an absolute mistake to worship the saints as something separate from you. Worship what they have as you. You are the one who you ultimately have to, not worship because that could make you puffed up, but worship that potential power that you have to become who you really are. This path of self-realization, which is our particular path, the name that Yogananda gave it, is to realize yourself on all levels of your being. Not just in prayer, in work, in exercise, in sports, in walking, in cooking, in taking care of your children, in everything. If you put energy into it, you'll be able to do it better. Even the food that you eat. Why does Mother's cooking taste good? It's not just that you got used to it. So finally you've sort of built up the habit. There's something else. I remember one time I was cooking for Christmas with a group of other people. And I just happened to feel extremely joyful. And we were all feeling joyful. And we were singing chants, and as we were cooking, we were just somehow filling that food with these vibrations of joy. Then when I ate, everybody was laughing at me. I think I ate 3 times more than the biggest eater at the table. There was just such joy in that food. I just kept eating it. And afterwards, instead of feeling full, I just had the best meditation I'd had in months. The next morning I woke up and I was hearing like a choir of angels singing, "Oh God, beautiful." But it was all from putting that joy into the food. When a mother cooks, she cooks with love for her children. In fact, if she doesn't feel love, they better go out to dinner. But when you put energy into your food, when you put energy into what you do, it has something. This is why, in a way, it's a pity that so much of our civilization, if you want to call it that, is so much is mass-produced. And be good energy for other people. The energy you put into your work. I've often taken people to Disneyland, especially people who work in our different aspects of Ananda. And personally, I'm enough of a child to enjoy Disneyland as it is, but after all, after many times of being on those rides, you begin to think, well, I have seen it all. I don't go for that. I go to just see, admire, and